Driving under the influence can have deadly consequences, yet it continues to happen. Recent proposals to lower Hawaii's blood alcohol limit for drunken driving have hit roadblocks each legislative session. Opponents argue the measure unfairly targets responsible drinkers, but supporters say it can help prevent senseless tragedies. Do you think Hawaii's DUI laws should be tougher? Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Olena Hugh. It's a sobering fact. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, every day about 28 people die in drunken driving crashes. That's one person every 52 minutes. And in any given year, 1.5 million people are arrested for driving under the influence. In Hawaii, it is illegal to operate a motor vehicle with a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08% or higher. According to the NHTSA, a driver with that blood alcohol content will experience difficulty concentrating and maintaining speed, impaired perception and judgment, short-term memory loss, and difficulty processing information. There's a push to reduce that limit to 0.05%, which can result in reduced coordination and ability to track moving objects, difficulty steering, and reduced reaction times. But efforts have stalled. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email or call in with your questions. You'll also find a live stream of the program at pbshawaii.org and over on our PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now over to our guests. Sergeant Thomas Billins is with the Honolulu Police Department's Traffic Division. A graduate from Maryknoll and Santa Clara University, he's been on the police force for 11 years and has extensive training in alcohol and drug-impaired driving, speed detection, and traffic collision reconstruction. Sarah Haley is a deputy public defender with the Hawaii State Office of the Public Defender. After graduating from the University of Chicago Law, she was a public defender in Memphis, Tennessee, before clerking for Hawaii Chief Justice Mark E. Rechtenwald. Joining us from Kentucky is Alex Audie, the national president for MADD, or Mothers Against Drunk Driving. At the age of 13, she was on a jet ski when an intoxicated boat operator slammed into her, leaving her severely injured. After the accident, her family became involved with MADD. And over from Washington, D.C., Richard Berman. He is the executive director of the American Beverage Institute, which is a national restaurant trade association dedicated to the protection of responsible on-premise consumption of adult beverages. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I wanted to begin our conversation by chatting with Sergeant Billins about giving us an example of what 0.08 is in terms of consumption.
I would like to touch bases on possibly a 0.02 is the first measurable amount of alcohol. And that's when we first start to see cognitive delay and inhibitions. This is when somebody might become more talkative or the life of the party or something like that. At a 0.05, you start to see the fine motor skills diminish and reduce. Their cognitive and judgment capabilities are also impaired. At a 0.08, you start to see gross motor loss in large muscle groups that also relate to your cognitive delay and inability to make proper judgments.
All right. And so, before lawmakers this year and in past years, there's been a bill to reduce the alcohol level to 0.05. And so, Sarah, what can you tell us about where that bill stands now, and what does that mean for you as a public defender?
So my understanding is, I don't know if it's official yet, but the bill seems to be dead for this year. Of course, it can be brought again next year. So that means the law should remain as it is now as to the 0.08 BAC. I would note there is another part of the statute that is current right now that does cover any impaired driving. So you don't have to have a BAC official count for it to be considered a DUI.
Interesting. And over in Tennessee, our representative from Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, you in Kentucky, pardon me, you actually had an experience as a result of someone operating a boat while intoxicated.
I did. I was run over by a drunk boater when I was 13 years old, so nearly 12 years ago.
And tell us a little bit more about that and how it impacted your life.
It impacted my life in every way. I wouldn't be who I am without the crash. There's nothing in my life that didn't change. So I was sitting on a jet ski behind my dad's house on a lake here in Kentucky. It was nothing out of the ordinary, something we did all the time every summer. And there was a 17-foot bass boat coming under a nearby bridge at about 70 miles an hour, headed towards my mom and brother who were in our boat across the narrow lake from me. My mom screamed. He banked it to the left and never straightened out. The boat hit me from the side going over 60 miles per hour, went up over the jet ski and landed on top of my body. I sustained severe injuries from head to toe, including a traumatic brain injury classified as shaken baby syndrome, a broken neck, and the loss of my right leg. To no fault of my own, this was my new life, and I will live with and suffer from every single one of my injuries forever.
Well, thank you for sharing your story and for advocating for something that you believe in. Also want to mention that we'll be taking viewer questions and comments. I've got one right here. We're going to get to it in just a moment. But also wanted to chat with Mr. Berman, who's over in Washington, D.C., to tell us what you are hoping folks will take away from this show tonight.
Well, perhaps I can just key off of a couple of comments that have already been made. The sergeant talked about how people were impaired. And of course, everyone can give their own interpretation as to just what loss of motor skills are, et cetera. But rather than use numbers, let me use some studies that people would be very comfortable relying on. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration looks at impairment for a variety of factors. And 0.08, which is the law in Hawaii right now, is equivalent to talking on a hands-free cell phone. That is considered to be a violation of the traffic laws. You can be fined up to $300 for talking on a cell phone while you're driving. Again, this is a hands-free cell phone, but the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says that is the same level of impairment as 0.08. And for the viewers' purposes, they should understand that 0.05 is a 40% reduction or a 40% increase, if you will, in the arrest level exposure to go from 08 to 05. So you can imagine it's a fairly significant change off of a law that's equivalent to talking on a cell phone. And there is also studies out of the University of Utah that talks about 0.05 and all the various ways that you can equate that. And Utah, as you may know, is the only state that has gone to a 0.05 level. And the University of Utah's studies on impairment have shown that people who are 65 years of age or older are actually far more impaired than someone driving at 0.05. So you have some frames of reference that people can actually relate to. As far as Alex's accident, which is horrific, and I have dealt with a lot of people who've had these family tragedies. I don't even know if Alex knows this, but I was the only corporate consultant to Mothers Against Drunk Driving in the 1970s. And I dealt with the board and I dealt with the founder of MAD, trying to help them come up with policies that I thought would work. And the person who ran over Alex had a blood alcohol level of a 0.18, which is probably, and that was tested a couple of hours after he had hit her. And so at 0.08, you're getting close to 4 times this 0.05 level. And that's the real problem with drunk driving today. All those statistics that people throw around are generally people who have had far much more alcohol in their system. These are people who are generally chronic alcoholics, and they have far more alcohol in their system than anybody would normally be able to tolerate. And these are not the 0.05 drivers or boaters. These are serious drinkers.
And Sergeant, what would you say in response to Mr. Berman's comment?
Well, you equivocate the fact of hands-free driving to the same level of impairment of a .08. That might be true for someone on a cognitive level, but you're not taking into consideration the effects of alcohol and the physical body. It slows reaction time cognitively, but it also affects your gross motor skills as well as your ability to keep and hold your attention. So merely saying that a .08 is the same as somebody who's talking on the cell phone with a hands-free device, I think is an oversight in terms of impairment. And that's
I'm only citing the government statistics.
Although Sergeant is out on the streets, overseeing the traffic department with those that are drinking and driving.
Well, the sergeant actually has a lot of experience in this area, but if you go back several years ago when .08 was a major fight in this country, there were a number of studies in the what shall I call it, the PRIME study on .08 drivers was done by Rutgers University in New Jersey. And they said that police cannot identify a .08 driver unless they have had substantial numbers of arrests and they had had a number of interactions with people who are at .08, which is to say that these are not people who are falling down drunk. These are people who probably the sergeant could identify because he's had so much experience, but there are subtle differences in people. And so again, people just need to understand that .05 is substantially lower than .08. And that's why, a number of states, some 6 or 8 states have tried to pass .05, but when the legislators have understood just what the real translation of .05 is, that law has been rejected in all of those states, just as it's been rejected in Hawaii.
Not necessarily that it's been rejected, it just hasn't passed. Sarah, what would you say in terms of your support or not supporting the most recent bill that was submitted?
So my office did not support the reduction to the .05, and we did submit written testimony. I appeared for the oral testimony. We have a few concerns. One being that, for example, a petite woman, one alcoholic drink would be equal to .05 BAC. So we do have concerns that drivers who are not impaired to the point of hurting someone or having an accident that are maybe just getting one drink after work would fall into a category that they would be breaking the law if they're driving.
And Alex, what's your take on the .05 blood alcohol level? And maybe if you can also speak on the fact that Utah has implemented that as the barometer.
Sure. So I think most importantly is it's not an accident. It's not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's a choice. People make a choice to drink and drive. And so, whatever alcohol it would take to make some person reach .05, we take no position on legal adults drinking who are of legal drinking age, but we do take a position on what they do after. And that's why you plan ahead. That's why you have a plan for how you're going to get home safely or to your next destination safely long before you take the first drink, no matter how much you plan to drink. And so I think it's really important that we remember that none of this is accidental. People are making a deliberate choice to drink before they get into a vehicle, whether that's a boat or a car. And so we just ask that they make that plan ahead of time, regardless of how much they intend to drink or how much they end up drinking.
Have you seen a reduction in accidents in Utah since they changed their law?
Absolutely. And the year after Utah adjusted the law to .05, there was a 19.8% reduction in fatal crashes. What's important to me is there is a big reduction, but more so than that, I heard Richard say earlier that it wouldn't move the needle that much. And that's concerning to me from a victim perspective. I only needed to save one person to not die, one person to not live the way that I live. Why wouldn't we want that? Why wouldn't we all advocate for that?
So if I may, I just wanted to respond because I think that Alex is referencing the NHTSA study that came out pretty recently. Utah is the only state that has passed the .05 BAC law, and I'm using NHTSA's own report. But, and again, I'm not a statistician, but I was just looking at their own graphs, and unfortunately, I do think that the finding that there's this huge reduction is cherry picking the years. So yes, there is a reduction from the year right kind of before the law was passed to 2019. But if you go back a few more years, you'll see that there are similar low numbers. So it could be natural variation. We don't really know. So making the conclusion that the numbers have significantly gone down just isn't right when you look at the data from NHTSA's own report in their graph. And I'd also note, I know you didn't mention this, Alex, but I have heard talk, oh, well, Utah has such lower numbers than the U.S. as a whole, but they had lower numbers even before the .05 law was passed.
We do have
If I could put a finer point on that report, it's true that in 2019, which was the first year that Utah actually implemented that law, they did reduce fatalities by about 14%. That was, again, the only state that did it. Now, in that year, most states reduced their drunk driving for whatever reason. Numbers went down. I mean, numbers have been going down for many years. But there were at least 3 states that kept their .08 law, 3 small states, just like Hawaii, low population, who had much more significant percentage reductions than Utah did. So again, the Utah drop is not a standout. If they had not changed their law, I don't think it would have made a difference. There was no correlation. And if I can go back even further, there was a fight over this very same issue after .08 had been passed. And in California, the Department of Motor Vehicles, again, this wasn't anything other than the people who were right there on the ground. The California DMV tried to find how much of a reduction they had from .08, and they said there was no statistically significant evidence that .08 had made a difference in California.
All right, we have a question from our viewer, Mike and Makiki. He says, how many times can you have a DUI until you can't have a license anymore? Not just revoked, but indefinitely.
Is that question to me? Sorry. I think it's the 4th time you get arrested for DUI and convicted of the license while license revoked. I think it's a 10-year ban. Sarah, if you could comment on that, you might be.
Yeah, so there's 2 different. One is DUI convictions, and would be driving while your license is suspended or revoked for DUI. If your license is suspended or revoked for DUI and you drive, whether it's drunk or not drunk, on your if you have 2 prior convictions, so your 3rd one, you would have your license revoked forever. So hopefully that answers your question. A 3rd offense DUI can be charged as a felony, and so you'd be looking at losing your license for a 3rd offense.
Definitely, yeah. Let's see. Actually, Sergeant, if you could kind of go into detail exactly what happens when someone is pulled over or suspected of driving under the influence. And then there's also a little bit of a debate as to whether or not you should blow while on site or give blood after you're taken into custody. Maybe if you could expound on that.
Yeah, I spent over 8 years on the DUI task force. A good portion of my career was involved pulling over motorists for multiple traffic violations. My main concern on the roadway was to stop any hazardous operator of a motor vehicle, whether that was somebody who was weaving, somebody who was speeding excessively. So these are things that I focused on very heavily. And through my investigation, I would determine whether or not they were impaired. So at the first step would be the vehicle in motion. What kind of violation did this person exhibit? Were they speeding? Were they weaving across multiple lanes? Were they driving too slowly? Did they have difficulty judging the space between vehicles? Upon my contact with the operator, I am judging their appearance, how they are responding to my questions for their license and registration. I might observe some indicia of alcohol impairment or other types of drug impairment. And based on that observation, I would ask that individual to participate in a standardized field sobriety test. The standardized field sobriety test has 3 phases. We ask them to look at a stimulus with their eyes, and then we judge their ability to follow our stimulus properly, and we might observe some nystagmus there. Then we ask them to do a walk and turn test, and we have several clues that we're looking for their signs of impairment, as well as a one-leg stand test. After all of this, we take as a whole the totality of the circumstances, their driving pattern, their ability to provide me with the registration, my interaction with them, as well as the sobriety test. At that juncture, I would make the decision of whether or not I was going to arrest this individual for DUI, then offer them a preliminary alcohol screening. And this is the on-field breath test, if you will, people like to say. I would suggest that person provide a breath sample there, because if an officer is offering this breath test or preliminary alcohol screening at that point, they've made a decision that you are impaired and that they should remove you from the roadway for your safety in the community. Now, if you provide a sample and it was below the per se limit of 0.08, the officer could choose to then maybe provide a ride share or give it some other option other than an arrest. So that's what we based our arrest on, and that would be my advice to anybody there.
And Alex, what other types of advice do you have for folks as well?
My best advice is to make a plan. And I want to speak a bit to the license suspension piece. We know that 50 to 75% of people continue to drive with a suspended license, and many continue to drive drunk. And so we know that that is very concerning to be our only way of stopping people, because like we discussed earlier, we know it's a choice and people are continuing to make this choice. But the NHTSA study out of Utah also showed that the lowering the BAC to 0.05 had an impact on people choosing not to drink and drive for fear of getting caught or whatever their other reason was. And so we're thankful for this culture shift in Utah. But more so than anything, my advice to people is just to make a plan. You know, we are not against people drinking who are of legal drinking age, but do so in a way that makes sure you get to go home at night and make sure you get to go home without hurting anyone. Make a plan before that first drink, because after one drink, your perception may be different. You may be impaired to the point that you wouldn't make the right choice. So make the right choice, have a plan to use rideshare, have a friend drive you home. You have the choice, and make sure it's the one that protects yourself and your community.
Could I respond on just the license suspension issue? I just wanted to talk a little bit about the license suspension, and I've had a lot of those cases. I just want to note our concern. My office has raised this on numerous occasions at the legislature, but there is a significant disparate impact for those in poverty versus those who are not when it comes to license suspension. So if you can afford an ignition airlock device, then that can be, here in Hawaii, that can be installed on your car, and that does allow you to drive generally while your license is suspended for DUI.
How much does one cost?
I'm not sure the exact amount. I want to say it's $60 or $80 to install, and I think about $60 a month. You can get a 50% discount if you meet certain indigent qualifications, although unfortunately those hurdles have been harder and harder to get documentation for. So even a lot of our clients that are in poverty still can't get the proper documentation to show that. Also, even if you don't own your own car, you can't get an ignition airlock device. So those that are of means are able to get those and drive lawfully during their license suspension, but those who can't afford it can't drive at all. So that means not their kids to school, not to work. A lot of my clients, it greatly affects their ability to provide for their families. So I just want to note that I understand the thought process behind it, but it does have a disparate impact for those who are suffering from poverty.
I do want to make note that driving is a privilege. When someone makes a choice, knowing that they are going to lose their ability to drive, they still make the choice. Driving is a privilege, not a right. And so while we want people to be able to provide for their families and take care of their kids and things like that, they're still the person who made the choice.
All right, we are getting barraged with questions and comments, so we're going to start by taking some of our viewer questions and comments. So Tom from Waikiki is telling Richard Berman, is it responsible to drink any amount of alcohol and then drive?
Yes, the law says that it's perfectly fine to do that as long as you don't exceed the proper limit. Driving at night is more dangerous than driving in the daytime. If you want to think about all the different ways people are impaired, driving while you're listening to the radio is considered to be an impairment. As I said earlier, driving while you're talking on a cell phone, you're in a conversation with someone and you're distracted, that's considered an impairment. We never used to talk about impairment. We only talked about drunk. And the semantics of the conversation have changed. And so people can talk about impairment. The sergeant talked about impairment at 0.02, which is a little silly in the sense that accidents that are caused by drunk drivers in Hawaii are not at 0.02. They're generally not at 0.05. What you have in Hawaii, the average fatality in Hawaii from a drunk driver is 0.18. That's the average. And these are government statistics. Now, 0.18 is nearly 4 times this 0.05 level. And as Sarah suggested earlier, there are people who could get arrested after having 1 drink. And that's terribly unfair when you're trying to go after these people who are having a 6-pack of beer or drinking half of a bottle of bourbon, and you're passing a law that is going to affect people who have had relatively tiny, small amounts of alcohol in their system, which are not related to drunk driving. So yes, I do believe, to answer the question, I do believe that people should be allowed the freedom to have a drink and to have 2 drinks if the case may be. Your body metabolizes alcohol 1 drink an hour without fear of being arrested, of going to jail, because you can go to jail for a DWI, of losing your license, and of having extremely high insurance rates for several years after you've been arrested. People in some states are losing $10,000 just for a DUI where they were not at risk for themselves or other people. That's the tragedy here. I think we have to stay focused on the high BAC drivers and the repeat offenders. The fellow who ran over Alex had done this several times before. I mean, he had been arrested several times before. The woman who formed MAD, Candy Leitner, had her daughter killed, and the fellow that killed her had several prior arrests. Those are the people that are still getting away with murder, quite frankly, and that's where the attention should be.
We have a comment from Gail on Facebook. She says, I think if you have a DUI, the car should be taken away or impounded for a time period depending on the degree of the offense. Current deterrents are insufficient. I think it best to get tougher because damage can be permanent and or fatal. Deterrent should fit the crime. We do have a question from Chadwick on Facebook. Sergeant, how many deadly crashes here in Hawaii have been alcohol related?
So this year alone, we've had 17 fatal collisions, and 5 of those were caused or had impairing factors of alcohol. And to me, that's 4, 5 too many. Something that, as Alex represented, it's a choice, getting behind the wheel of a vehicle after drinking and being impaired in driving. And I want to talk a little bit about the misconception that 1 drink is going to impair you. We keep saying 1 drink in a petite female is going to be a 0.05. I don't see any statistics or any studies that would suggest that, but yet that has repeatedly been thrown out there. 1 drink and I'm going to be impaired. I would argue that if it does impair you, then yes, you shouldn't be driving. I would invite anybody to attend our alcohol workshops. In my 8 years in the DUI task force, I've run over 4 DUI alcohol workshops a year, and I was a part of each and every one of them. And we've had petite females that fit that demographic. Not one of them have 1 drink and are above a 0.05. In fact, the last alcohol workshop that we had, 14 individuals, I had a female that would fit that demographic, a 5'2", 110-pound female. After having 3 drinks, is only at 0.042. And this is after not eating and in 1 hour of drinking. And this is immediately after they have taken their last drink, 15-minute deprivation period. Somebody who's being arrested and then tested for a BAC is, they drive their motor vehicle, they get subjected to a sobriety test, they get arrested, they go down to a police station where they might submit to a test. This test is done well beyond 15 minutes after they have drank, possibly an hour or 2 hours after they have had their last drink. So 0.04 or 0.05, 1 drink, that is not happening in that demographic.
Thank you, sir.
If I could, I wasn't there when the sergeant was doing these tests with these people, but I can tell you that the literature which has been peer reviewed has shown exactly what Sarah has said before, that a 120-pound woman will be at 0.05 without any difficulty with a little more than 1 glass of wine. And that is something that the government statistics bear out, that studies from various universities and research grants have supported. I don't know what the test was that they had in Hawaii, but I'm only going after this issue because it is central to this debate. 0.05 is a relatively low level of alcohol for, as the sergeant said, a medium-sized or diminutive woman, and putting these people at risk for literally going to jail for having a glass of wine is ridiculous. That is not where the accidents are happening, and I doubt if any of those fatalities that the sergeant talked about were caused by somebody at 0.05.
Well, the bill proposing that we change the law to 0.05 isn't moving forward, so maybe we can move forward as well. We do have a question. Is there a statistic on the success rate of DUI convictions by the prosecutor's office? Would we know any of that?
Do you know? I don't know the statistics on the success rate.
Okay. Could there be another law to include additional penalties for driving a secondary car other than their interlocked car?
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Could there be another law to include additional penalties for driving a secondary car other than their interlocked car? So someone that is convicted has an interlocking device, but they drive someone else's car.
Yes, so I can answer that question. If your license is suspended or revoked for DUI and you're approved for the ignition interlock device, you can only drive the car with the ignition interlock device. You can't drive a second car. So that would be considered driving while license suspended, revoked for DUI if you drove a second car. So that would have the same penalties.
Okay. Shell on Facebook says, no matter how tough the law gets, there are always going to be people driving under the influence. So what Alex said is highly recommended, or there has to be some other ways, like discounted Uber or share rides or taxis. Is it possible to get a ride from HPD?
Unfortunately, we don't have that service for individuals providing a ride for intoxicated motorists. But the rideshare programs out there are many of them that you could utilize, as well as getting a friend to take you. I would be happy to look at some of the programs or HPD incentives if one were to contact us, and we could provide that service, whether it would be gift cards or something else to rideshare programs.
Alex, you have some promotions like during 3-day weekends where you're encouraging people to ride share and whatnot.
Yes, so we partner with Uber and Lyft, and we sometimes are able to have promotions during popular holiday periods. We just did for St. Patrick's Day, where we encourage people at all times to make a plan, use a ride share, and oftentimes Uber gets involved with those and is able to provide discounts. We want to give people all of the options to make the right choice. There are so many options, whether that's calling a friend, public transportation, ride share. There are so many ways to make the right choice, and we just want to make it as easy as possible for people to do that. I do want to highlight, Mr. Berman keeps mentioning that my offender was at 0.18 and a multiple time offender. That is my story. That is true. but that is my story. That is not everyone's story. And I talk to people every single day who lost their children, to people who may have been at 0.08, may have been at 0.03, but had other things in their system. My story is not everyone's story. And while my story is very close to me and very, very impactful for me, I talk to people every single day who have stories very different than mine. And just because the average BAC in Hawaii may be higher, average doesn't mean everyone. And that's not the story for every victim. So it's very important that we protect everyone.
Can I show you some statistics here? A little graph.
Sure. I love all your research.
If you're a fan of Karl Rove, you will note that he always has a whiteboard. I don't have a whiteboard, but these are Hawaii statistics. And what I want you to see here, these are DWI fatalities where alcohol is related to the accident. Now, that doesn't mean that the driver was the one who had the alcohol. This could have been anybody. It could have been a passenger with the accident. It could have been a pedestrian who was drunk. But this is where the accidents are. If you look down here, what I've got is all the BAC levels, a category of BAC levels that are lower than 0.08. This is from 0.02 to 0.05 to 0.08. And as you can see down here, all of these are basically the same, which is to say that if you're going to go after a 0.05 driver, then you could go after a 0.02 driver, which would be half a glass of wine, because it's the same level of accident rate and it's the same impairment if you want to translate accidents into impairment. And this is the silly part of it. Now, let me read you one quote that was in the Salt Lake Tribune during the fight. This is by the founder of MAD. The founder of MAD said, and if you will allow me to just read it to you, she said, "The traffic safety community is distracted by an issue that will do little to save lives. That is, lowering the drunk driving threshold from 08 to 05. She was angry that they were focusing in Utah on going to 0.05 when the problem was far in excess of 0.08. And she said, we're arguing about, it's kind of like trying to lower the speed limit from 55 to 50 or from 65 to 55. When all the speeding is and the reckless driving is at 80 and 90, and lowering the speed limit by 5 miles an hour doesn't do a thing for people who are already in gross violation of the current law. And this is the problem that we have been dealing with for a very long time. And the reason that we continue to have the problem, and remember again, I was a consultant to MAD, so I understand the problem from MAD's perspective. I mean, I understand the anger, I understand the emotion, but people who drink at these levels, at these abusive levels, have a disease. These are people who are alcoholics, and it's very difficult to address those people. And so what we end up doing, the traffic safety community says, well, let's do something, and we can't do anything about those people, so they go after social drinkers. And that's not where the problem is. And we have to stop that and recognize that if we're going to solve the problem, we have to go after the problem and not go someplace else. Or as Candy said, be distracted by anybody having a drink rather than people who are abusive drinkers. And an abusive drinker is what almost killed Alex, and that's what has to stop.
Well, there are a couple things I want to point out. Number one, with all due respect, it's been a very long time since you were a consultant to MAD. At the same time, there is nothing silly about drunk driving. There is nothing silly about being a drunk driving offender. They are not accidents. I know that you keep saying that when you reference your chart, but they're not. They're choices and they're crimes. I would love to be able to introduce you to all of the families who had someone that was saved in the state of Utah because the BAC was lowered to 0.05, but I can't because they're not part of my community because they were saved by the BAC lowering to 0.05 and because people who were impaired and not safe to drive were taken off the roadway before they had the power to kill or injure someone.
it's great, Alex, that you believe that you know who all the people are that were saved by having a lower BAC level. But it's very difficult for you to identify anybody. I could not identify anybody who was saved by a law that the statistics say don't make a difference. You know, in 2020, 1 year after the BAC law at 0.05 was passed in Utah, Utah went up by 50%. They went up substantially more than the rest of the country. So if you want to talk about that BAC law saving lives, it certainly wasn't having any effect in Utah. And quite frankly, the restaurant community was very upset when this thing was being passed in Utah. And they were afraid that they were going to lose a lot of revenue. And it turned out that they really didn't lose any, which was another way of saying that people were drinking at the same level that they were drinking at before, and that 0.05 wasn't really affecting anybody's behavior.
All right,
Now,
we have more comments and questions, and one of them is, how would reducing the DUI limit improve the situation for people with multiple prior convictions? Or maybe more so, how would it affect those if they have multiple prior convictions?
Do you want me to answer that? So I guess lowering, it's kind of a complicated question. Certainly more drivers that are pulled over for impaired driving or a belief that there's impaired driving, there could be additional convictions if we lower the amount to 0.05. So it is possible that someone who has prior convictions could get a new conviction that they wouldn't have got otherwise. I will say, and I don't have statistics for this, but just from my own personal experience, that multiple offender DUI, people who have multiple prior DUIs often have alcohol addiction issues. And I will say that they're probably not going to be the ones captured by 0.05. They're often extremely drunk when they're pulled over. So that would be the ones we see for like a habitual DUI felony case or something like that.
Sergeant, has there been any new technology developments in order to catch someone that's driving under the influence, or anything new that you can speak of?
The way officers focus their attention to impaired driving is we stop hazardous motor vehicle operations, whether it's speeding or driving hazardly across multiple lanes. That technology hasn't changed. That's the officer. We implement a breath test, but that technology has been there. There have been some modifications to make that system a little bit faster or more efficient, but it's the same technology that's there.
All right. And Dean on Oahu says, rather than just losing your license after multiple convictions, you should also lose your car. And we have a retired Maui police officer that also says that he agrees with the sergeant. There's much more to drunk driving than what Richard is saying. You can't compare it to someone on their cell phone. He hasn't had to knock on someone's door and tell them that their loved one is dead. So ultimately, we are trying to do what's right and come up with solutions. And there's not going to be a simple or an easy solution. And so moving the conversation forward, Alex, if you could tell us a little bit more about what MADD is doing to move forward and also, try to help those that may need help if they need it, or families that are in need.
We are here to support victims of drunken drug driving across the country forever. We know that justice doesn't begin and end in the courtroom. And part of being a victim of this crime is it doesn't go away. It's not something that you live through or you get over. It's part of your life. And so our organization serves these victims day in and day out. We are with people to hold their hand when they don't want to get out of bed in the morning. And I have those days myself, as many people I know do. And so we are here to serve the victims and families. But one of the most important things we're working on, and technology focused right now, was recently passed by Congress and signed by the president in November of last year. And it is a mandate that will put drunk driving prevention technology as standard equipment in all new vehicles. And we are so grateful and so excited. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety estimates that once this technology is in all new cars, it will save an estimated 9,400 lives every year and countless injuries. We know that more than 10,000 people are being killed every year, more than 300,000 are injured. This technology could essentially eliminate drunk driving But no matter what legislation I pass or what technology is created, it will always come down to personal responsibility. And so we are out there with our programs and with our stories. We know that it's easy to say no to statistics. It's hard to say no to someone who's staring you in the face and telling you what happened to them. And we are out to raise awareness and to encourage people to make the right choice.
So is that technology that would detect if you've been drinking? Like as soon as
Not
you get into your car?
necessarily.
Okay.
No, so not necessarily. There are different categories of technology, but what the technology truly looks for is impairment. So there are 3 different options: driving performance monitoring, which is things like automatic braking and lane departure warning; driver monitoring, which would put cameras either in the dash or in the rear view mirror to monitor a person's eye gaze and their head movements and things like that; or alcohol detection. No one knows what technology is going to be the final decision yet. NHTSA has 3 years to look at all of the available technology and make a decision. But most of these technologies will be looking at whether or not a person is safe to operate a vehicle.
All right. We have a comment from Leslie in Honolulu. She says, why don't they make it cost drunk drivers more? Take away the license, take away their car, make them go to jail, make them pay a higher fine. The guy who killed the pedestrians in town this past year or 2 was on his 4th DUI. He didn't have a license. How did he even get a car to drive? So Sarah, if maybe you could speak on,
Sure. Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about penalties. I'll just note my concern always, and particularly because as a public defender, I represent those that are indigent, so they cannot afford their own attorney, is that when you base penalties on fines, on money, people who have means are not going to be greatly affected by those penalties. But those who do not have means, who don't have a lot of money, they are greatly affected. So that is one of my major concerns. And I understand that I'm no fan of drunk driving myself. I understand that we don't want drunk driving, but we have to be aware of how different types of penalties affect different people based off of their economic situation. So I understand people's concern, but you do have to take into considerations people's financial ability to comply with these penalties. So the penalty structure in Hawaii is there's a lot of details to it, so I don't want to bore everyone with it, but there is a mandatory 14-hour, this is just for a first offense DUI, there is a mandatory 14-hour class, and that's something that whether you are poor or you're rich, you have to take that class. So that's a penalty that really applies equally to everyone. There is a substance abuse assessment and any recommended treatment. So if they do find that you have a substance abuse issue, then you do have to get treatment, and that's required. And that's for a first offense DUI. So there are some penalties in there that are already in place that I think are designed that would apply to people equally, not based on their financial status.
All right. And Sergeant, would more DUI checkpoints, particularly near areas with multiple bars, help the issue? And what's the status of checkpoints?
I'm not sure targeting areas that have bars would necessarily reduce the amount of collisions. We do have throughout the year random sobriety checkpoints in which we choose the location based on the number of DUI arrests or if there had been recent fatalities there. Our goal with the sobriety checkpoint is just to keep everybody honest in terms of, hey, we're out there, we are enforcing the DUI laws, and if you had happened to be driving while you're impaired or had a few drinks, it's a reminder if you see the sobriety checkpoint to don't drive impaired, and if you had too much, maybe use one of those ride shares. I certainly think increasing the number of sobriety checkpoints would show the public that we're very serious about impaired driving, and then it is not okay to drive while you're impaired.
And Mr. Behrman, from the American Beverage Institute, what can you say about how you might be encouraging people to act responsibly?
Well, the American Beverage Institute, as you said in the introduction, is a restaurant association. And the restaurants, in fact, one of the ones that I was counseling back in the 70s was the first one to provide free rides to people. They do an enormous amount of server training to stop people from having a drink that's beyond what looks like responsible consumption. In fact, restaurants will provide waiters and waitresses with a guaranteed tip on a table if they're going to be the one that triggers the manager coming over and telling the customer that they no longer can have any more drinks, because then the customer might react and leave a crummy tip for the waiter or waitress. The one thing that the restaurants have done more than anyone else is to be right there where drinks are being consumed and to stop overindulgence. Now, that doesn't mean that every restaurant can be awarded with interdicting someone who's had too much to drink, but there's been much more of that over the years than you would imagine, and that's cut down on a lot of people who would get out on the road with their car keys in their hand, and the restaurants continue to operate very responsibly in that regard.
We have another comment from an anonymous viewer. Hopefully self-driving cars can have an impact on drunk driving. What are your guys' thoughts about that?
I'll leave that to Mr. Musk.
And, obviously there has been a progression in terms of technology and whatnot. And so, in terms of rideshare and taxi and all that, there are options out there. And I think that's what the message is that Alex is trying to make very clear as well. So what do you see in terms of your clients most frequently when they come to you and they need your help?
I guess what are some of their concerns maybe? So one, and I know I've said this a few times, but a big issue for my clients is obviously the money. How do I keep my job? How do I take my kids to school? How's this going to affect my family's life? How's this going to affect my life? And some of those effects, again, might be for the best in the long run if it's a substance abuse assessment and treatment or something like that. But I represent a lot of people with DUIs, but I represent a lot of people with the driving while license suspended and revoked for DUI. And, something that my office has brought up and that we're very concerned with is, you look at a first offense DUI, while you can get jail time, there's no mandatory jail time for first offense DUI. For a first offense driving while license suspended revoked for DUI, meaning you're not necessarily drunk, but you're driving on a suspended license, has 3 days mandatory jail. Cannot get around it if you're convicted. So even if someone says, it was emergency, I was driving my kid to the ER, I'm trying to get to work, I was going to get fired if I was late, I had to take the car, no matter how good their story might be, the judge can't get around those 3 days. A second offense is a whole month in jail, and a third offense is a whole year. And I represent people with charged many different types of misdemeanors, petty misdemeanors. I'll give an example. Assault, which is a very serious and violent crime as a misdemeanor, doesn't have mandatory minimum jail time. But you drive third time, not necessarily drunk, but on a suspended license for DUI, and you're in jail for 1 whole year, cannot get around it. So you're away from your kids, you're away from your family. So, and again, if you have the means, you can pay for ignition interlock device and you can drive on your suspended license. So I can say that's something my clients are very concerned with when they come in with those types of charges.
And Alex, what kind of concerns are you hearing from Mothers Against Drunk Drivers?
So I work a lot with victims. I am a victim myself, and I talk every day to people who have lost their families because of someone's choice. And so while I sympathize with the concerns of an offender, they're still the ones who made the choice. And we know that the average drunk driver has driven drunk approximately 80 times before they're caught the first time. So a first offense is very rarely the first time someone has made this choice. They know the consequences. It's not a secret that you'll get your license suspended or potentially go to jail or things like that. They know the consequences and they make the choice anyway. And so I have no sympathy for that aspect. I sympathize with people who want to be there for their families. So do the people that are killed and injured. We want to be with our families. We want to be in one piece. We don't want to have to live with the consequences of someone else's choice.
And Sergeant, what kind of advice would you have for folks that are maybe buzzed or, planning on drinking?
Like was mentioned before, if you plan on drinking and that's your sole way to have your fun, we say, yeah, go have your fun, but make a plan for after. Don't drive impaired. If you feel like you're impaired or buzzed, don't get behind the wheel of a car. Use those rideshare programs, call a friend, let somebody know that you need help.
All right. Well,
And I want to thank you so much, Sergeant, for everything you do to take drunk drivers off the road and waterways. I am married to a police officer. I know that your job is very hard, but please know that every single moment a drunk driver spends off the road or off the water because of your actions is a moment that could have saved someone's life or prevent someone from living the way that I do. And so I'm so thankful for everything you do. I also want to add that the alcohol industry supports MAT, supported our legislation with this technology, and wants to be on the right side of history.
Thank you so much, Alex. We appreciate you and everybody for joining us this evening. And also thank you to our viewers for contributing to the conversation. So thank you to our guests from the Honolulu Police Department Traffic Division, Sergeant Thomas Billins, attorney with the State Public Defender's Office, Sarah Haley, and staying up late with us tonight over in Kentucky, Alex Oddie from Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And lastly, from Washington, D.C., Richard Berman from the American Beverage Institute. Thank you so much. Next week on Insights, access deer populations on Maui and Molokai are out of control. The invasive animals are damaging ranches, ruining crops, and destroying watersheds. So what can be done to tame this problem? Please join us then. I'm Olena Hugh for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha and a hui hou.